Okay, I will start already. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Just as more participants or attendees are coming in the webinar chat, I put a Mentimeter. It's a 30 seconds questionnaire. If you take the time to complete that while I'm welcoming everybody, that would be great. So yes, a warm welcome today. It's our second Climate Resilient East Atlantic Flyway webinar about people, wetlands and birds, participatory approaches for a resilient East Atlantic Flyway. So I'm Rebecca Stewart. I'm the project coordinator of the CREAF project. I'm really happy to be the moderator today on behalf of the project, which is funded by the International Climate Initiative of the German government. As I already mentioned, the focus today is on how participatory approaches involving communities, stakeholders and conservation partners can strengthen resilience and sustainability for migratory birds and the people who depend on the wetlands along the East Atlantic Flyway. And we have two excellent speakers with us today, which both bringing very rich experience from across the Flyway. Before I introduce both of them, I will do a little housekeeping. So attendee cameras and microphones are off or muted to avoid any disturbance during the presentations. But you are welcome to use the webinar chat to, yes, introduce yourself, welcome. And we also have a Q&A box. So we will initially listen to our two speakers, and then there will be time at the end to ask some questions, which I will read out. And as I mentioned already, in the chat, there is a very, very brief Mentimeter questionnaire. And if you could just take a few seconds to complete it, this would be really, really good. We do have simultaneous French-English interpretation, so please click on the small globe, choose the language you wish to hear in, or the original audio only, using the little globe icon. And if you have any issues with sound or anything like that, please write in the chat and we will try to help you. So I will kick things off by introducing, well, I will stop sharing my screen actually and introduce, oh yeah, okay. I will reshare the Mentimeter while our first speaker gets started. So our first speaker is Vard Hagemeijer, Senior Advisor at Wetlands International. So Vard has long been at the forefront of international wetland conservation, and he's talking to us today about sustainable development and participatory approaches, with a focus also on training. So Vard, thank you for joining us. Are you there? And please share your screen and get started. And I will, thank you, Elvis. Elvis has reshared the question. Over to you, Vard.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Good, good. Let me share a screen. Should be this one. It's always a surprise to see what comes up. I think you should be able to see the screen now. The first slide, which is just the title, as Rebecca has already introduced. Now we'll be talking about participatory approaches for sustainable development. And thank you all for joining. I'll be taking you through a few more generic principles about sustainable development and how participatory approaches fit into that. And then a little bit about how that is also the background to our CREAF, our Climate Resilient East Atlantic Flyway project, and what we want to do in the near future to really implement this participatory approach in our work. And it already starts okay, because I don't, yes, it is moving, I think. Although I just see black. It's the end of the slideshow. Let me see. Why does it go to the end? You see a slide that says world in crisis?
Yes.
Okay, that is good. So this generic introduction that I was talking about is starting with the view that, okay, yes, we are in a world that faces many crises. It's actually not just one crisis. It's a whole load of crises. People struggling to get food. The ecology of the world is in crisis. Development crisis for people to move forward and to continuously develop themselves. Finances are in crisis. And then also climate is in crisis. And this is one of the drivers actually of the project that we are doing. We're being funded by ICI, which is in basically a climate fund. And we are trying to look at the world with biodiversity at the center in the face of the climate crisis. In many international debates, sustainable development as a generic term is seen as an answer to those crises, as a way out. And that sustainable development is looking at achieving well-being of citizens while also having a healthy and supportive natural environment, a just society, and an equitable economy. So these are the main components of what is behind an approach to sustainable development. And there are a few definitions for what sustainable development really should entail. And one of those is that sustainable development meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And if we take that back a little bit to the field that we are working on, you could also say that sustainable development meets the needs of the human society without degrading the integrity of ecosystem services, summarized as nature. And all of this thinking is also the supportive framework for our project, for the CREAF project. So how do you do that? How do you adopt sustainable development approach in the way that you work? Often we talk about crisis in terms of problems. And the first step to allow you to think about sustainable development is to reframe problems into opportunities and making processes continuously support ecosystem services or the supply of energy and resources and livelihoods and health and well-being. So reframing from environmental or social problems to how can natural processes sustain these very important components of life. So basically reframing from restrictions in use to assuring that there is a continuous delivery of ecosystem services. And that is behind the approach that we will be taking also in CREAF in the sites that we will be working in. To do that, it is critical that we engage all those that are affected by what happens in the site and have an influence on that site. And the way to do that is participation. And here the word participation already comes in. The title was Participatory Processes, which is all about make stakeholders participate in finding and working towards the solution, both in terms of design of that solution and in the implementation of it. There are a few steps that you need to take to achieve that. So how do you work towards participation? First, you identify the stakeholders, and then with them you work towards gathering the best available information, both scientific, social, and economic and political information related to the issue that you're dealing with. You need to understand the policy frameworks and context. And maybe here in the background, you already recognize some of the work streams in our own project. We have a science and monitoring component in our project. We have a policy component in our project. We have a management component in our project, which is the result of what we want to together agree that we need to do as the outcome of the process towards sustainable development. So once you've identified the stakeholders and gathered the best available information and understand the policy frameworks and existing policy guidance, then you need to agree on a solution. And an important principle there is that you do that by addressing the interests of all the stakeholders that you are engaging. And if you do that well, if everybody sees the benefits in the agreement that you are achieving, that agreement almost by itself becomes self-enforcing, which is a much better way of having something, an agreement in place than ones that you have to enforce externally and you impose on people. The following step is to develop flexible instruments to achieve and support that agreement. That could be things like policy and law that capture the principles and describe how to achieve that. An important one is tools. You provide people with helpful mechanisms, tools, and ways of working. And that you build, as a third component, the capacity for the people to follow the guidance, to follow the policy, and to use the tools. So again, a critical part to sustainable development is participation. And it's the best degree for a lasting agreement and a lasting solution. If you do not bring all the stakeholders in, if you do not create that full participation, you are likely to see your agreement, your solution starting to show cracks and not last over time and fall apart over time. So basically, sustainable development is a multi-stakeholder consensus building process. You're working with all your stakeholders towards an agreement, which is a consensus that maybe does not achieve the best for each individual single stakeholder, but in a way that it brings interest to all of them, is a consensus and an agreement that everybody can support over a longer time. Now, if we found out that it is a consensus building process, we can go back to consensus building theory, and there's a lot of scientific literature and a lot of practical knowledge about how to do that. How do you build consensus in a multi-stakeholder group? Here, I will be introducing some of the components of a training that we will do as part of the CREAF project in the beginning of next year, because consensus building works with a whole range of stakeholders, and not all those stakeholders are equally equipped to participate in that process from where they currently are. And we are hoping that we, through this training that we will be doing, first of all, help the project consortium members so that they can subsequently help the stakeholders that they work with to go through this process, this consensus building process. And consensus building is a decision-making process in which groups seek representation of all affected stakeholders. So that's the first step that we, as the ones that will facilitate this process, need to do. How do we find all those affected stakeholders? And I've put in a green note here because what is often forgotten is that there are stakeholders without a voice by themselves. Biodiversity in a landscape can be a stakeholder, but biodiversity can't speak. So we need to either find an organization or a person that stands up for biodiversity and represents the interests of that stakeholder. The second step is not just to be able to say what you think you need, what your interest is, but also to identify what the interests of the others are. Listen to each other and look for common patterns and look for shared understanding of each other's underlying interests. And in that context, once you've received information about, listened to, and tried to understand what the interests of others are, you'll find that there's often common interests and common things that you can put together into a solution that therefore becomes a solution that brings value to all stakeholders or the strong majority of all stakeholders. And those kind of solutions are the ones that we need to put into our management plans, into our development plans, into what we are putting forward as solutions for the situations that we want to deal with. And if we are able to reach agreements, and that could be a management plan, that's, for example, a very practical example of what we will be developing in this project. If we are able to bring a management plan forward that does take all these interests into account, then we will have one that will last over time. I already referred to that consensus building theory. I'm not going to take you through all the details of it, but there are very structured approaches to this that help everybody identify all the steps in this process that are important, and to identify what to do in each of those steps to finally reach that agreement that will last over time. It is specific terminology that will be explained in the training, but it is composed of things like assessing the potential, where you identify who will be leading this process, who will be doing the assessments, who are all the stakeholders. The next one is the design of the process itself. What are the ground rules? What are the decision rules? What is the work plan? Who will facilitate this? Then there is the gathering of knowledge and information. Who are the experts? What are the methods? What is our common set of knowledge that we use to base our discussions on? The next one is a very important one, is to seek those joint gains, to look for solutions that bring benefit to all the stakeholders. And based on that, how do we reach that agreement? How do we capture the commitments of everybody? And then the next step, how do we implement it, and how do we adopt an adaptive learning process where we continuously learn from what we do and we adapt the solution to become even more future-proof. That first step where we engage these stakeholders, that's critical for participation, because that will ensure that everybody that needs to be included is included in the process. Also, for those steps, there are very detailed and structured ways of working that we will introduce in that training, and that I'm already sharing some examples of here. So there we adopt 5 steps for the preparation of the consensus building process. And I'm not going into the detail here, but it relates to initiating stakeholders, how to involve them, how to gather information, how to analyze the results being what are the interests of everybody and how do those align, how do those oppose, can we already see groups of interests, etc. And how to design a collaborative process towards bringing those solutions together. I said there is a very structured approach to this. There will be a lot of guidance with flow diagrams like this. What is the role of the sponsor? And what is the role of the assessor? And how does that assessor help everybody to go through that initiation, that data gathering, that analysis steps, that design of a process, etc. All of this will be brought to you in that training later on in a lot of detail, and not just offered to you. We will also exercise it together in simulation cases that will allow everybody to play a role that is not themselves, but to really experience what it is to be part of such a process in different roles. All of that to allow us as partners in the project to help the real stakeholders on the ground later on to go through this process and reach those agreements. A few more important issues that will come up in that training is, how do you identify your stakeholders? Who are they? How do you select who you want to be involving in the process? Because often stakeholders are large groups. How do you work with representation of groups? How do you identify those? And what are the principles of representation? How do you deal with an often silent majority of groups that do not have clear representation or do not have a voice? How do you bring those and their interests into those processes? Very important components of participatory processes that we will deal with in that training. And this is very, very important because not all the stakeholders that we deal with in the landscape are equally equipped to participate in these processes. And if we would just go in and ask questions and do interviews, etc., without having our eyes open for that inequality of that capacity to participate, we would not get a balanced approach. I earlier introduced consensus building theory as a basis for these kind of reaching agreements. Another theory that we can use here is negotiation skills. There's a lot of theory about how to do negotiations. And once we have made our stakeholders equipped to participate in these negotiations, we will facilitate a process of negotiations that is successful. So not the traditional one like you bid high and you do not show what your real cards are and you play games, but ones that is working towards outcomes for all partners, a fair process, but still efficient, without wasting time and no value left on the table, meaning that we try to really capture all the opportunities in reaching the agreement. And the agreement should be met in a way that everybody is willing to continue working together, and that the process doesn't create enemies, but rather friends, or at least parties that are willing to continue work together towards that solution and in achieving that solution. Again, here is a very structured approach to doing that we will go through in detail in the training. I'm not going to introduce you now because it needs too much time to explain all the terms that are in here. But one thing that is so critical to all of this that I would like to introduce here is the difference between interests and positions. Often we see people expressing themselves quite bluntly, hardly, with a certain position. I don't want this, or I want that. But really what is behind it, what drives that position, is what we need to find out. And if we are able, if you are able, and if the stakeholders are able to do that, to really ask themselves, so why do I want this? And what is really driving what I'm saying that I want? And if you can do that with all the stakeholders, you will see that there will be a whole new set of opportunities coming up, a new set of combining basic interests of stakeholders into solutions. This is one of the keys to the successful achievement of the way forward of a successful sustainable development. And I would like to stop with this slide, and hopefully you can take this in already, and hopefully you are interested now to join that training if you can. That will happen later on in the beginning of next year, and where we will explain how this principle and a very structured approach with facilitation and with clearly identified roles for many players can lead to sustainable agreements. For example, sustainable management plans for sites. That's where I would like to stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vaad. It's really interesting and inspiring, especially for me, as I do not know the theory in detail of this approach. Please, if anyone has questions for Vaad, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A box, preferably the Q&A box. I see there's already one. Thank you so much. So we'll move on from the theory and the broader perspective to our second speaker, Nandi Thobela from BirdLife South Africa. And she is the Empowering People Program Manager for BirdLife South Africa. Vaad, I'll ask you to stop sharing your screen. And Nandi, invite you to share yours. And it's a great pleasure to have you with us. And please take the floor.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. Let me just share screen. This always happens. You have a practice session and it works in the practice session. And then when it comes to the time to perform, then it doesn't want to perform, but we'll make a plan. We'll
I
wait.
know, so recognizable.
Okay, so let me share my screen. I'm hoping that everybody can see my screen. I do
Yep.
apologize. I think I managed to get the option for sharing the sound. You must just in case, let me know if it is coming through on your side.
I will let you know. Don't worry. You just need to go into presentation mode, and then I think we're there.
Thank you so much,
Very
colleagues, for this opportunity. I seldom get a chance to talk about something that I'm passionate about and something that I actually studied. My name is Nandi Thobela. I'm the Empowering People Program Manager at BirdLife South Africa, and I'm very honored to be part of this webinar and share a teeny weensy little bit of information that I happened to come across and fell in love with and use in my everyday life at BirdLife South Africa. I thought it would be important to just maybe give you a bit of an introduction on myself. I myself am a rural girl from the rural rolling misty hills of Green Natal in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. It's the best province. And I grew up there, growing up there. When growing up in rural areas, you're always very close to nature and living within nature. So I think that's where my first inspiration came from. I managed to study a Bachelor of Social Science and Environmental Management and Rural Resource Management, which actually merged both my interest in people and in nature. And I've enjoyed, 15 years working with communities in different shapes and forms and structures, and also being in the wild. That is my favorite thing to do, research and understanding the ever-changing dynamic space that we are very privileged to be working in. And, I've had quite a varied experience working with birds. So I think birds is just my first love and passion. I've worked with birds as a crane field officer, monitoring bearded vulture, supporting communities in merging the digital divide in environmental management or protected area management and technology, and facilitating training and skills development and knowledge sharing, and of course, empowering people. So this is where I come from. And what I'm going to talk about today, this is just a bit of a short drongo overview. I hope this taskbar is not impeding the view. We're going to look a bit, I thought it would just be important to just touch on a little bit of some theoretical context to understand where these PRA tools come from. Wout has provided us a very good and solid background, and it's linking to what he has said. We're also going to look at how are these tools applied in practice. And then I wanted to share a case study. So this is an unpublished case study, and I thought, it's very important to share working in progress. I always like to understand a work in progress than a perfect, finished, solid project, because you seldom find those, even those that claim to be that. When you do look deep, you find so many holes. So I'm going to be sharing a work in progress. It's work that we're working on. We haven't written up yet. And then we're also going to look at how do we address some of the challenges in this PRA space, and how do we align and create synergies. And lastly, we'll look at how can we take some of the lessons that we understand and see how we can apply it across the flyway. So without further ado, I'm going to move on. Okay, this always happens to to understanding. So where does this PRA, what is the foundation of this PRA? And just bear with me, a little bit of a text here. I did think to include bird pictures so I can distract you from some of the things in this presentation. So I hope we don't look too deeply and enjoy the pictures. I'm very, very, very nervous. And so what I understand, so I encountered PRA in my first year of university when I studied, and it's one of my majors, rural resource management. That's what it was called then, community resource management. And it borrows its fundamentals and its foundation borrows from participatory development theory, which emphasizes or prioritizes people, inclusion, and values the local knowledge, understanding that people have something to bring to the table, and really ensures that the communities are recognized as decision makers. And so that's where it comes from. So we can use these terms interchangeably. PRA, participatory rural appraisal. Sometimes you'll hear rural participatory appraisal. It's the same thing. And that's where it's drawn its foundations from. Not only that, it also borrows, participation in the PRA is not only a means, but it's also an end to empowerment, which enables rural communities to apply critical thinking of their situations, understanding their circumstance, identify the gaps and priorities, and then take collective action that is necessary. This framework also borrows some principles from the empowerment theory, which highlight the importance of strengthening individuals and groups' capacity to make informed decisions and choices. We understand how community structured. There will be a collective, there will be individuals, differing depending on the context. It also borrows one of the underpinning principles of this PRA approach is also borrowing from constructivist paradigm, which means it recognizes that knowledge is a social construct. It's constructed by people and it's co-produced by people, through dialogue, through engagements between community members and facilitators. So it could be within among community members, or it could be with facilitators, which is almost without, because facilitators could be external people coming into a system. And then lastly, a bit of some theoretical background is it's informed by systems theory. Now, a lot of us might understand systems theory. A lot of things are premised on systems theory, but it acknowledges that, as people, as communities, as households, as traditional councils or leadership structures in a community, we are part of an ecosystem. We are part of a whole system. So it takes a holistic approach. We are but one component of a system, and what we do or our actions could impact, other people. We might not be connected perhaps geographically, but you find that culturally, and now in this context, you find the birds in this flyway do connect us and make us part of that systems. So systems are always changing. You can have a micro system, intermediate system, and you can have a very macro system. And I think that's where this the flyway component comes in. But in that systems theory, it then brings in the holistic approach that when you're approaching communities, you have to understand that they are but one component of a greater picture. So how do we do this PRA in practice? What does it look like in practice? And I think Elvis asked me to look at some of these 3 topics here: dialogues, joint planning, and community monitoring, which are of course very relevant topics within the PRA. And we're just gonna look at them quickly. So what these talk about is now extending on the participation. I mean, the word is in the name. So participation. Now it's how. So how do I get people to participate? Looking at the first topic about visual overview and context, remember the systems theory about providing people context and providing people a visual overview. In this migratory flyway, we are but one component. It wouldn't suffice for us to look after rollers here in South Africa when we're not talking to our neighbors or any other people that are part of this corridor. So we need to show them that vision. That is our approach, and that is the space we are acting in, and that's the whole vision. We might only impact this part, but that is the whole vision. So this will allow people, first of all, to even learn that, oh, I'm part of a system that I didn't even know about, and it's so big, and it's got all these influences. So you learn, allow people to learn, it allow people to make decisions, and at its core, start to stimulate the roots for participation and development methods, because now people are also going to have their own ideas to say, oh, well, so what does that look like? What would it look like if it was like this? We talk about participatory dialogues, and our understanding of dialogues might be two people engaging with one another. The dialogues in PRA approaches are open-ended dialogues, because the purpose is to understand, firstly, is to learn, and is to allow the person to be able to be empowered to share the knowledge that they have. The dialogues are not about extraction or information, or getting information out or whatnot. That's when you look at semi-structured interviews, when you've got a more structured approach to say, I want answers to these questions. So I'll put together some a questionnaire, and this is what I want answered. When we talk about dialogue, we talk about engaging, and you're sharing and they are sharing. So it's not extractive that I'm asking you questions, tell me about this, tell me about this, tell me about this. It has to be open-ended and leading on to something that you might have not even known. You also don't go in with a preconceived idea to say, this is where I want to take this person to. If you've already understood that this community has got a problem of poaching, they're a very bad community, and you go with that understanding, that mindset, you structure a dialogue in that, you are not using the tool to its full potential and what it is designed for. It's designed to show you other things that you might have not been aware of, maybe from your desktop observation or assessment, or from your other engagements, because different tools bring out different types of information. I've digressed a bit now. I see the next, looking at joint planning. So when we are now on this common page, and we have engaged and we have shared so much about each other, or about our circumstance, or about the problem we're trying to solve, about the opportunity, and now we can look at how could we potentially plan this together. So how we do that, for example, like we're speaking about the flyway, and how some people might just be one component of the flyway and don't know what's happening in all the other countries, have never even been to all the other countries. What does that even look like on a map? So a map is one of the ways that you can display that to show this is where you are, this is where, you know, the birds fly. Now you start to show all these land use relations on a map at once. You know, when you are living in one small place, you only see, I only see this. I don't know what's happening in another province, in another border, in another country. But when you use a map, you are able to display many relations. And the mapping tool in PRA, resource mapping, it's called resource mapping because we're mapping what do we have, what is happening here, the current land use actions, and the things that are impacting on us and influencing us, is not about, you know, printing nice fancy maps and showing people this is where you are. It's about doing it in a participatory approach. So it's called participatory mapping. When we look at grazing land and we want to do a grazing plan, let's go and walk and see, point and show me where the grazing areas, because not everybody is able to interpret a map. So you do that mapping, and sometimes it's a drawing on the ground. That's the mapping that's being done to map the resources. And what is interesting and what come out of that is you would understand what is it that the community identifies as a resource, identifies as a value, or is maybe not even aware of. And then you'd find that maybe they map all of those things. They don't even mention birds because they don't recognize that there's a value that the birds are bringing in this ecosystem. So then you are able to identify the gap. So that's looking at, you know, seasonal calendars and problem ranking. So once they've mapped and said, this is our resources, you know, this is our strength, this is our weaknesses, this is our threats and whatnot. So what is the bigger problem? Some will say the bigger problem is stock theft. That's how you rank the problems. And when you ask them, you say, why do you think it's stock theft? And then they'll say, because it affects everybody. Everybody here is a stock owner, and that's the common problem. One of the problems when we do this exercise in the communities as part of a feasibility study, the common problem for us in our communities is litter, is disposable nappies. And this is such a challenge that we've found that it has actually gone up and exceeded even problems like stock theft, because these disposable Pampers are just everywhere and there's no proper waste management in rural areas. And then the cattle eat them, the cattle eat the plastic and all of that, and then their cattle get sick. So it's not even stock theft, it is litter. That is one of that's how we get to those kind of problems. And then community monitoring. This is really now the action, coming out of these, the deployment of these tools is, right. So now that we know our resources, we know our problems, how can we track and understand these problems better? And that is our role in that is empowering the community to be able to do that, to be their own custodians and their own management of their land, of their resources, and creating an environment that will foster learning by doing. And that's when the skills and it comes in, the skill training opportunities come in. And, if you want to monitor rainfall, you could do this. We could put up a weather station. This is how we would use it. Is rainfall something important to you? If it was drawn out of the problem ranking. And then in this way, when you're doing this monitoring, you might find that, you come back because you have to be able to adapt your method. You might find that actually, no, that is not working for us. You get them in some communities, you get them nice devices and say, okay, you can go and monitor your species, your animals. Then you find there's absolutely no reception in those communities. We've got a nice fancy device, but it never works when it's supposed to be reporting perhaps in real time. So that's when you have to then adapt and see what other activities could we do. And hopefully that would come from the community to sustain these initiatives. So all in all, with this topic, a dialogue is very important, and having an open mind and almost like a blank mind into your dialogue is what is very important. These three tools in joint planning, community monitoring, and dialogue, what they show us is that, which I will also emphasize in my conclusion, the PRA approach is not a linear approach. It's cyclical, and it allows us to adapt. It allows us to change. It allows us to innovate, and it's interactive with nature. In its nature, it's interactive because you have to consult, whether it's stakeholders, whether it's natural resources, and this reinforces the idea that participation is not a single event, but a continuous process and engagement and reflection and adaptation. So that is what comes out for me when I look at this topic, and that is what has been the proof in my 15 years of implementing, working with communities. Looking at perhaps here, the road that we have walked in this community-led site management. So I'm just going to share a little synopsis, a little snippet. The Nzigeni project is a mammoth project that I would love one day to share with all of you, or hopefully visit, but I'll just share as really small part of it, the road that we have walked. It has not been as simple and easy as this Rhinos Road. So we've got this livelihood project, which we are calling Nzigeni Community Conservation Project. And it's one project that, I moved on to the next slide. It's one project where we are trying to mitigate a conservation threat, a conservation problem, by working with the communities. And because we identified that what is good for birds and the species in those communities is exactly what is good for communities. And this project also touches some of those principles of sustainable development goals. So in it, looking after life on land, creating socioeconomic opportunities, developing partnerships. It also obviously speaks to our organization goals, working with communities to prevent birds from extinction. I'm going to play this video now as an introduction to Nzigeni, and if the sound doesn't come through, I'm going to kill myself.
So just to, Nandi, the sound is not coming through, but just to remind you that we really do not have time on our side. So yeah, because I think we'll have room for questions. So I am going to give you maybe 4 minutes or 5 maximum to wrap up so we can open the floor for discussion. Because I know there'll be lots of questions about your fantastic presentation. And
Okay.
birds too.
Okay, I'll skip the video. So this is Nsigeni Nature Reserve. And this is just, it's home to some of these species. And of course, I only brought up the bird species, but if you understand ecosystem, it comes with many other species. And these are just some of the birds that are called Nsigeni Nature Reserve a home. You might think, well, it's Nsigeni, it's a nature reserve. It's already preserved. What is the whole problem there? It's a Ramsar site. It's got this expansive high altitudinal wetland, peat-based, that supports the white-winged fluff-tail. The reason why we are here and interested here is because in this Nsigeni Nature Reserve, which is here, it is bordered by 32 villages that are living in poverty, that are living in so much frustration and are not understanding or reaping the benefits of being, bordering a protected area and understanding the value of this protected area because of the socioeconomic situation that they find themselves in. Under 2 traditional authorities, so we've systematically worked with the community, starting from the top and coming down here, trying to mitigate the threat that they are causing in the reserve by pushing their cattle in illegally. So they are pushing their cattle in illegally to graze, and they've said that's because their home rangelands are stuffed and overgrazed, and the grass is better on the other side. And so in this engagement, we said, well, how about if we try and make the grass better also on your side? Would you be interested in that? And they said, well, of course, that was always the first priority. So we'd rather work on that. And then hopefully that will reduce the grazing at Nsigeni. So these are just some of the problems that are exacerbated by the overgrazing or the illegal grazing and the nature reserve and at the wetland site. Also on the nature reserve, there's a community lodge. So they've got this income generating opportunity, which is not sustainable. It's not profitable. It's poorly managed. And there's an issue of water. So we identified all of these issues with the community, and we came up with a method to see how we can help for us to all come to the same page. And this is the method that we've currently applied, obviously borrowing from PRA, looking at, we want to improve socio-economic opportunities and quality of life. That was all our vision when we decided with the community. So how do we do that in a way that supports biodiversity and conservation? We do that by looking at habitat rehabilitation and land use, improving land use that will increase the biodiversity, ergo increasing the tourism value of the place, and then the ecosystem goods and services that we get out, like water, like grazing, like building materials, that will also improve, and that will lead to the improvement of the quality of life. This is what PRA looks like in practice. It's meeting outside, it's meeting in a place that is comfortable for the people. These are just some of the actions or perhaps some of the achievements we've managed so far. You see, empowering, sharing, there's firefighting equipment, there's uniform for people who are working in this project, eco rangers, cattle auctions, providing market access, stimulating the rural economy by providing small, medium enterprises opportunities to sell. They sell at the auction, they sell at some of these events that we have. So we've achieved a lot in terms, particularly social cohesion and economic opportunities, and aligning the social institutions within the community. And that is what PRA allows us to do. Of course, this is not without its challenges. Like I said, it's a work in progress. There's many challenges related to how do you include gender, social safeguards, and having people arrive at one common vision, because people are different. Even as a couple, you struggle to arrive at one common vision, but you use the same tools to address the same problems, and you infuse the local knowledge. How were these problems solved in the past when you had stock theft? What was the system that was used? And you see how you can infuse that with the PRA knowledge. Sorry, I'm running very fast. Elvis said there's no time. Lessons that we can, I think, share across our flyway context is we must understand within the PRA, there will be different tools for different contexts. What might work here might not work with a different community or different people. And trial and error is okay. I think we are so afraid to fail as people who are professionals or working with people. But you must understand, in working in system, if you are working truthfully and honestly, you are bound to employ something that is correct and perfect, and it might not have the results that you expect. So I think that it is okay, and you can adapt. PRA allows that for you to adapt your model and your approach. Extended engagement is key. Principle to everything. In this project that we did 2-year stakeholder engagement, not implementing anything, just for 2 years talking. We identifying common ground. Like I've mentioned, it might not be a location, but maybe species or resources. And then identifying champions. Not everybody in the community has a passion for conservation, or maybe has a mind for entrepreneur business or whatnot. Not everybody. So you have to identify those champions that are going to keep the fire burning within the community when you are not in the community, and will keep the message going. And then never ever, you have to include the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge systems, to make the PRA and the work relevant to people and make it sound to them. So, and those are two different things. Infusing it and including it are two different things. And then allow, I think in this Flyway, cross-pollination and learning exchange. What is the community doing in another country? Maybe we bring that other community to see, this is how we're managing this resource, this is how we're dealing with this problem. And then understanding that the people, our audience, mainly that we're dealing with, are adults, and some whom have not been to schools, who have had different upbringings. And so we cannot, we have to have realistic expectations. PRA has its merits, but it's not the silver bullet. This is just my critical approach. So there will always be a need to interpret it and adapt it in your own way, that supports the culture and the traditions of the environment that you are working in. So, and then the approach will also influence the success of the tools. That is what I've found. When I've gone to a place and I have dressed wearing a dress, and humbled myself and sat on the floor on a grass mat and whatnot.
Nandi, hello,
yes?
Nandi. Sorry, just 30 seconds remaining.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so the approach, your mannerism and your approach is very important. Learn people's languages, greet them in their language, take the step to try and understand them and understand the context you're working in. And then that will tell you which tool you're supposed to use. And as I mentioned, it's not linear. And as I close, this is this African proverb I want to share. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. The PRA tool allows us to go together. It's possible. Thank you.
Wow, Nandi, thank you so much. That was a lot of information in a short amount of time. And we are running a little bit out of time, as Elvis said. I will also share my screen just to, if we don't get a chance to answer all the questions now, you can send questions to our email address, and we would pass them along to Nandi and Vard. But I did spot a couple of questions. So I think in the chat, we have one from Christina to Vard. So Nandi already stated that the participatory approach is open-ended, but how about the consensus building approach? So yeah, it takes a while to raise awareness on joint decisions and working on implementation. But how often should and can joint decisions be reviewed and revised in your experience?
Thank you for the question. The process is a circular one. Is one that reaches an agreement and has an evaluation and adaptation process in it to review.
But we can barely hear you. I don't know if it's only me. Just please thank you.
Maybe this is better. Sorry.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I said the consensus building approach, as I showed you, is a circular approach, which does indeed allow for, once an agreement has been reached, to evaluate and adapt it to changing situations. There's always a balance between how do you say that, creating some stability for policy, law, and tools to be adapted to the new agreement and allow them to be used. So the time that is put to the completion of the circle and the review depends a bit on how stable the situation is and how much dynamism there is in the issue, in the site, in the location where you are working. So it's difficult to give something in terms of years or days or but setting an agreement is probably done for a longer period, and only adaptation is done when there is a real need, and that will come up through monitoring and assessing and evaluation. But it's hard to give a time period. So open-ended means I don't know how you would interpret that, but it is a process that is ongoing and therefore allows for very long-term application.
Very good. Another question that we had from Neil Shaw, who's, I think, working in Namibia, rolling out the SMART toolkit. And Neil asked to both Vard and Nandi, and actually anyone who would like to comment, what systems or tools do you use to empower communities in terms of monitoring and active participation?
I'm happy to go first. We'd love to use SMART because in the area that we're working in has very poor reception. We have used Kobo Toolbox. We're currently using Survey 123. So the eco rangers are inputting the rangeland data, doing all the monitoring that we're doing with rangeland assessments and checking all of that we need to check. So some of that information and the reporting is going through Survey 123. But we would love to use something that we could also incorporate other aspects that we'd like to monitor. So like SMART is one of the tools that we're looking to use because of its offline capabilities.
And Vard, do you have something to add?
Similarly, in what we have been looking at, we will be exploring, actually part of one of the work streams, what tool is best to gather data on birds in the field. There are a few existing tools that we would like to see the applicability of and maybe need a few tweaks to be applicable. The more generic tools like Kobo Toolbox and Survey 123 would certainly also be applicable for other aspects of the environment than the birds, which probably have more dedicated and more further developed tools available already to work with. So hard to say, to give you one name, but there will be a multitude of tools that are going to be used. And besides formalized tools, there are a lot of approaches that can be used in terms of not just using questionnaires, but allowing people to just talk and tell stories, or even sing or do poetry or draw to express what their interests are, because many stakeholder groups are much better at doing it through a drawing than through an verbal expression or a written report.
Thank you. I think I'd like to squeeze in one more question, if possible. A question from Fahada. How can bird conservation be enhanced in urban settings? Because I think, Nandi, you were talking about rural settings, and I'm also wondering, are there transferable methods?
There are some. We're based in Johannesburg, our head office, and we've got projects that we work with communities within, because birds, they don't respect boundaries. So you'll find a secretary bird nesting on a farm, and there's a factory just nearby or something like that. So working with those individual farmers in terms of empowering them to help us monitor the birds. So we sort of align it with birding. Birding is a nice and extramural activity that you can do to relieve your stress and whatnot. So the time you're logging birds, that's contributing to citizen science. That's how I think sometimes in the urban areas, because we have a concern on how are these birds adapting in the urban areas, seeing a bird, logging a bird, that's contributing to citizen science. And then also we work with schools, so working with kids, creating artificial nest sites for some of the birds or owl boxes, and trying to improve our gardens. We put indigenous plants. We also have that project where we're planting indigenous plants in gardens and encouraging, so that the local birds come back. So with indigenous gardens in schools and in homes.
Very good. Vard, anything to add on that?
I think the approach that I've been describing is not restricted to any type of habitat, can also be done in urban environments. It's more about still finding the right stakeholder group and align or get to understand the interests that exist in the area, including the biodiversity interest, which will be very different from a city context than from a rural context or from a nature reserve. But in principle, the approach is still valid.
Excellent. I think we are out of time for today, but hopefully my screen is shared. Yes. Any questions, please, you can send them to the email address on the screen. And Nandi, you didn't have a chance to show your video. If you wanted to share, if there's a link for it, you could also share it, and we could make sure, attendees can also view it. If you're happy with that, that would be wonderful. So yes, with that, we can wrap up. Thank you so much for your energy and excellent presentations.
Rebecca, sorry,
Yes.
just to interject. I think just before you go, I think there's a question from India, I believe. Just while wrapping, you can answer that if there's a shared web page where we can share data.
I think we can, so is this from Mohan? So Mohan,
Yes.
if you send it's quite a long question. So we can, if you send that to us, or we can contact, if you send us an email on that one. And with that, we will end the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Vard and Nandi. And interpreters, you're free to go. Thank you.